the series was done by my sister, the talented Susan Tinkham. In this book, our hero, Ike Savage, travels from Minnesota's Iron Range to Hollywood's Golden Age, discovering America one used Packard at a time. We begin with his first Packard purchase in 1932. The deal had Ike trading his parents' house and all its furnishings to Barney Vida for a 1929 Packard sedan and $200. He knew Barney had gotten a bargain, but it was Barney's father that Ike had beat to the ladder when the Milford mine collapsed back in '24. Barney's old man had to pause to let 14-year-old Ike push ahead. Reaching the top, Ike had turned to help the man up, only to find the rushing waters that had caused the mine to collapse, sucking Mr. Vida under, along with 40 others who also perished. No favor he could do Barney was enough, and no favor could rid Ike of the shame. Of course, no one but Ike knew of this. Maybe that made it worse. He headed west in his new Packard, with dreams of working on Mount Rushmore. He carried with him a copy of a debut novel by a young novelist named John Steinbeck, given to Ike by the Crosby Crucible newspaper editor, who thought Ike had a knack for writing. An encounter with a gangster altered Ike's plans. "That really where Babyface Nelson's face hit the windshield?" asked the fellow at the garage near the police station in Billings. An oval sewn onto his shirt said Nolan. He pointed to the crack in the dried blood. Yeah, Ike knew he'd soon grow tired of telling this story. He had a little .25 caliber pistol aimed at me. I hadn't counted on it going off upon impact. He gestured toward the cast and sling. Nelson got it worse than me. Don't know how he ever drove away and never got caught. He's a slippery bastard, Nolan said, as if he had a clue. Suppose I gotta get that windshield fixed, Ike muttered. Before you touch anything, I got orders to have you call Mr. Grubb at the bank. He handed Ike a slip of paper. Looking at the number, then people out the window all heading in the same direction, Ike asked, "Where's everybody going?" "Ball game, season opener, first game in the new park." Nolan set down a wrench. "I think old Grubb wants to buy your car. Plenty of folks have asked about it, but he's got all the money in town. Owns some oil interests as well as the bank. Thinks a Babyface Nelson getaway car ought to be worth a lot." "How much?" I picked up the receiver. "Thought I overheard him say something about $1,000, but you didn't hear that from me." Holy Rose. Ike dialed the number and got Mr. Grubb on the line. After some small talk, Ike made his pitch. While I was planning on driving it to L.A., Ike gave Nolan a wink. "I got a friend there who says I can get $1,500 from it from some movie studio." They agreed to meet at the garage after the ball game. Ike followed the crowd toward the grand opening of an athletic park in Billings. The sign on the ticket booth said 25 cents or whatever you can afford. It was just across the border into Wyoming that Ike was able to escape Babyface Nelson, slamming on the brakes and sending Nelson into the windshield. He got a bad ride back to Rapid City from an attorney from this book. Was helped recuperating by ball players from this book as well, and an old prospector from this book. While on the mend, Ike wrote his own version of his ordeal with Nelson, which the attorney thought enough of to pass along to an old law school chum who had just purchased a literary magazine called the North American Review. Back at the gas station, with Grubb yet to arrive, Nolan helped Ike remove his belongings from the Packard. "Say, what's the story behind the whatever you can afford sign at the ballpark?" Ike asked. Nolan sighed. "Well, here in Montana, we've been suffering from the Great Depression since 1920. The rest of the country had its roaring 20s. Good for them. We're the only state in the country to lose population in the 1920s. The U.S. government had the mines running full bore throughout the Great War, providing copper and whatnot for building war machinery. But once the fighting ended," Nolan paused as Mr. Grubb's car pulled up. "Remember, you didn't hear any price from me," he whispered. "Not a word," Ike assured, as Grubb exited the back of the limousine. The banker entered the garage, careful not to touch anything, and walked slowly around the Packard, pausing near the back of the driver's side. "Bullet holes, yes, authenticity." "Actually," Ike interjected, "those came from some drunken hunters last fall." "Bullet holes are bullet holes," Grubb said, making a face probably reserved for boardroom decisions. "I'll give you $1,500 for it, not a penny more. And I'll need your signature on this affidavit attesting to the authenticity of this being the vehicle having been owned by you and later abandoned by Babyface Nelson." Grubb exhaled, making Ike feel like he'd already used up more of the busy man's time than he was worth. "Left the rope that Babyface tied me up with in the back," Ike offered. "Any stains on the seats are Nelson's doing." "1,500, Grubb repeated. "Cash, right?" Ike took his time reading the papers. "I don't trust banks." Grubb gave out a harumph worthy of his presumed status. He grudgingly pulled out an envelope from his briefcase and began counting out $50 bills. "Nothing smaller?" Ike asked. Grubb counted out 20 50s into a neat pile, then placed the envelope back in favor of another one and proceeded to count out 5 stacks of five $20 bills. "Pleasure doing business with you," Ike said, signing the document and gathering up the money. "Spend it while you can," Grubb said. "If FDR gets into the White House, he'll be giving all our money away to the freeloaders." Ike didn't much like being grouped in with Grubb. Figured he was much closer to the freeloaders than the Grubbs, and this latest pearl of wisdom from the banker further solidified Ike's vote for FDR in the fall. With Nolan out pumping gas, Ike divvied up the 20s between his suit and shirt pockets, thinking he should probably buy some new clothes, and 9 50s went into each sock. "Guess I won't be needing a new vehicle till all this heals," he said, pointing to the cast, as Nolan returned. With Grubb driving off, Ike joined the mechanic in giving the banker the finger. "Only power we got is when their back is turned," Nolan muttered. "How much you get?" "1,500. "Yeah!" Nolan thrust his fist into the air. "Thanks for the tip," Ike said, handing Nolan 2 50s. "You earned me an extra $500. Nolan hesitated to take the money, briefly. "Well, if you put it that way." On a train west, Ike met up with a woman who worked at a small southwestern Montana college and succeeded in getting Ike a job there. It was also there that he purchased a second Packard. He also received news that his story had been accepted for publication by the North American Review. Also in that issue was a story by a young novelist named Steinbeck. Upon being fired from the college, Ike decided to keep west and look up this Steinbeck fellow in Monterey, California. He quickly found out that to get to Steinbeck, he'd have to befriend Steinbeck's best friend, Ed Ricketts, a marine biologist who had a biological lab on Cannery Row. It worked. Ricketts had been impressed with Ike's story, and so was Steinbeck. "I felt like I had a gun on me the whole time I was reading it," Steinbeck said of Ike's story. Ike and Ricketts talked outside the Pacific Biological Lab with Ed on the top step and Ike sitting on the railing when an old delivery truck pulled down into the driveway, parking on the far, far side of Ike's car. Sigmund Ziegfeld Enterprises was stenciled along the side of the vehicle. Ike turned to Ricketts, who rolled his eyes. Part showman, part grifter. Ricketts explained, Ziggy must have heard you're a man with a story. A man with a large handlebar mustache came around the front of the truck dressed in plaid golf knickers and argyle stockings with garters and an old tuxedo jacket and a battered top hat. Let me get this straight, said a smiling Zygmunt Ziegfeld. You're the Ike Savage who rescued babyface Nelson, then injured Nelson in a daring escape. And this is the car. No, this is not the car. It's a Packard, right? Black? Well, yes, Ike took his breath. That was a 29. This is a 28. The title is in your name, right? Ziegfeld's smile just kept growing wider. I'll give you $600, cash. Ike sighed. The paperwork is in perfect order with this one and the real one. In fact, I signed an affidavit stating that the 29 Packard was indeed stolen by babyface. 700 and not a penny more. Ziggy just kept nodding his head, eyebrows bobbing up and down. But the guy in Montana, 750. Ziggy slammed his hand down on the hood like an auctioneer. And I'll sign anything you want stating that I'm well aware it is not the real thing. Ike stepped away, held his head, then kicked the back tire. An image of the 29 popped into his head. The real one had 3 bullet holes along here, above the back tire, only on the other side. Of course, they were made by drunken hunters before I ever bought the car, but I'm sure you don't care about that. Good to know. Ziggy marched over to his own vehicle. Ike heard Ricketts clomping down the stairs, didn't know he'd left, with a book in his hands. He sat and wrote, shaking his head all the while. Finally, he passed the book to Ike. How's this look? In an open space on some sort of order form, complete with carbon copies, Ricketts had written, I, Zygmunt Ziegfeld, do solemnly swear that Ike Savage informed me repeatedly that this is not the car stolen by babyface Nelson. Never was, never will be, and I simply do not care. I overpaid of my own free will with the expectation of convincing others that it is the real thing. 3 gunshots caused them both to scramble for cover. Wispy smoke rose up from the other side of the Packard. Bullet holes! Ziggy's huge grin came around the front of the car. Nice touch. Ziggy, I haven't even agreed to sell it. Ziegfeld slipped a large handgun into his cummerbund. 800, final offer. With that, Zygmunt Ziegfeld returned to his truck. He's a walking, talking example that you don't have to be smart to be rich. Just inscrutable, Ricketts muttered. He's loony, Ike offered. Loony like a fox, Ricketts went on. He'll park that heap somewhere on Fisherman's Wharf in San Francisco or outside some casino in Reno. Then he'll charge folks to get their picture taken sitting in it. Probably have some toy Tommy guns handy to make suckers feel like real gangsters. Ziggy came back around with a fistful of money, which he handed to Ike. And, my good man, if you join me on the road in this enterprise, I will make you good and rich. Ike finished counting the money. You already have. And no thanks, I'll not join you on the road. The keys are in the ignition. His published story, along with newspaper articles about Ike's encounter with Nelson, got Ike an invitation to Hollywood from RKO Studios. Ike purchased another Packard and headed south. Ike walked out of the RKO offices with a book on screenwriting craft and left the by the time he left the parking lot, also had a check for $1,000 from RKO Publicity Department for the sale of the teal-colored 1929 Packard. You might want to paint it black and add 3 bullet holes. Oh, I'm way ahead of you, the head publicity director said. Gonna put it on one of those rotating stages like you see at the car shows. A huge plaque will say, owned by Ike Savage, kidnapped by Babyface Nelson on whatever the date was. And you know it's not actually the actual vehicle I was kidnapped in, right? Did I say it was? No, I said it was owned by you, and you were kidnapped. Two separate sentences, no connection. Oh, and the passenger side windshield needs a crack from the inside and some blood. I tipped a nearby used car dealer and paid $200 for a beat-up gray 1930 Packard sedan. I never buy anything but Packards, he told the salesman. You can't beat the resale value. I got an apartment near Hollywood in Glendale, overlooking Hindenburg Park, which featured a huge stone swastika and its own Hitler youth camp. That is not fiction. While struggling as a screenwriter, Ike was asked to represent RKO at some big shot's home for an introduction to a new phenomenon called television. Something called a variety show had included among its other guests members of the minor league Los Angeles Angels baseball club and their mascots, two clowns from this book.
Oh yeah, the best.
Teddy and Bear. The thing was, Teddy, then known as Delmar, was supposed to have died in the same mine collapse referred to in the beginning of this book and throughout this one. I couldn't shake the memory of the fat kid in the mine. Baby fat, they called him. Everyone did. Ike had him pushing an oil cart. You're a natural, Ike had said. Just put all that blubber behind it. Though minor compared to his other regret of that day, it still bugged Ike that he'd been such a jerk to that guy. Delmar had once helped a younger Ike with his math homework. But once you got a nickname like Baby Fat, you didn't have a chance. Before the variety show finished, the clowns invited everyone in the viewing audience to attend the Angels game at LA's Wrigley Field the next afternoon. Pulling up to the ballpark, I could see Teddy and Bear clowning around for the crowd in line to buy tickets. He parked behind a car that appeared to have broken down. A man had the hood up and it was bent over the engine. Ike hesitated to help him, remembering the last time he played Good Samaritan. Besides, there was an armored truck in front of him. They could call for help. Ike passed by two guards heading back to the armored car, obviously returning from the box office. As Ike approached the clowns, he noticed a hat set out for tips and a sign, all proceeds go to the Wall Street Clinic and Kitchen. Ike tossed $2 into the hat, then two more upon witnessing the little mime doing a backflip off the top of the big clown's head. Wow, that's spectacular, Ike said, clapping his hands. He then addressed Teddy. Excuse me, I don't want to blow your cover or anything, but aren't you from Crosby, Minnesota? As a matter of fact, the clown eyed him up and down. Ike? Good memory, Delmar. You don't look anything like you used to, Ike joked, though even without the clown makeup, his physique looked nothing like the baby fat who grew up in the old neighborhood. Teddy chuckled. No more Delmar. It's Teddy, and this is my wife and partner, Vera. Ike shook her hand. I need to apologize to you, Teddy, for the way suddenly Vera pulled Teddy away as gunfire rang out, ricocheting off vehicles and sending game attendees to the ground or fleeing for cover. Ike followed the clowns to the entrance of Wrigley Field until bullets clanged off the turnstiles. Ike spied a half-open door marked private and dragged the clowns that way, pushing Vera ahead of Teddy as Teddy tried to push Ike in. Ike got the best of him, shoving Teddy through just as a loud crash plastered Ike's face into the door and dropped him to his knees. You're bleeding, Vera cried, pulling him in and inspecting his ear. You been hit? Teddy kicked the door shut. Sirens sounded, tires squealed, and the shooting soon stopped. Holy Rose of Sharon, Ike felt all around his head. Just my ear. Seemed to have lost my hat, though. It's a splinter of wood, Vera said, having removed it. Sort of pierced your ear. Shouting could be heard outside, and an ambulance siren grew closer. Were you apologizing for something? Teddy asked. I mean, before all hell broke loose? Well, yeah, I was hoping, if you were really still alive, to say I was sorry for what I said to you down in the mine that day. Whatever it was, Teddy began, getting to his knees. I'd heard it all before and had long since stopped listening. No matter, it was wrong. Might have been the last thing you ever heard. He wasn't about to let Teddy let him off easy. I wanted to be there. I thought it'd make me a man. You were only there because your old man got hurt. You wanted to be anywhere else. What did you say? Vera asked. I called him baby fat and told him to put his blubber behind pushing an ore cart. It probably sounded trivial, but it felt good to confess. I was such a jerk back then. I thought I was big stuff just because I had a job at 14. Nothing like having 41 guys perish after you'd gotten your sorry ass out of danger to give a guy a little humility. Everyone okay? Asked the policeman standing in the doorway. Ike here got his ear pierced, Vera said. Damn lucky, I'd say. The cop pointed to a hole in the door, another a few inches below it, and tossed Ike his fedora, bullet holes on either side of the crown. Holy Rose. Both hands trembled with the hat in his hands. And look at this. Vera dragged Teddy to the door. I can still picture the whole thing. I even yelled, duck down, because Teddy was standing straight up while you two tussled at the door. Ike, you at least had your head scrunched down. She pulled Ike off the floor and stood him next to her husband. She put the fedora back on Ike's head and shoved his shoulders down a ways. This is you two at the door. If you hadn't pushed Teddy through ahead of you, she ran her fingers from the fedora holes to Teddy's temple. The love of my life is dead. That Packard belong to anyone? Asked another cop. Yeah, that's mine. From a distance, I could see the bullet-riddled Packard and followed the cop to the crime scene. A police car happened to by as the crime unfolded, the officer said, and parked next to your vehicle just as the shooting started. Holy Rose. The windshield had been shot out, the headlights shattered, the radiator shredded, the roof peeled back and mangled, 3 tires flat. One side of the hood pulled back and hanging against a fender. Looks like pictures I seen of Bonnie and Clyde's car, the officer mentioned. I'll give you $1,000 for it, as is. Called out a voice from behind them. A Wrigley Field employee in charge of promotions, it turned out, with an eye on taking advantage of one dead security guard and 2 dead robbers to promote the ballpark. You know, it wasn't actually involved in the robbery, right? Ike said. Just an innocent bystander? No problem, he said, spreading his hands as if creating a scene. We built a stage just off the sidewalk with a big plaque. Wrigley Field Armored Car Robbery, May 3, 1937. In time, it'll become the getaway car. With Babyface Nelson's death at the hand of the police, the Packard market dried up, and Ike set his sights on screenwriting. Specifically, an old project that had been shelved by RKO called Mad Dog of Europe, about some fella named Adolf Hitler. Ike wanted to expose the huge number of LA Nazis he'd been able to infiltrate on weekends at Hindenburg Park. Enlisting the help of Teddy and Vera, along with a Lakota Sioux from this book, his friend, Woody Guthrie, this book, an ex-Jew jockey from this book,
Oh.
Oh.
and a bartender from this book. His plan was to thwart Nazi sabotage plans of National Guard armories along the West Coast. Well, things didn't go exactly as planned. I came to in a Packard, is barely able to see. Blood seeped from his left eye. Someone yanked his head back and poured alcohol into his mouth. Ike vomited. "Jesus, this dress is brand new," cried a woman's voice, a familiar woman's voice. "Hit him again and get him into the front seat," she added. Dragged out of the back seat and into the front, Ike fell against the steering wheel and someone started the engine up. It was dark, or am I blind? The vehicle moved slowly, then rumbled downward, certainly not on any road. As it jostled, Ike felt for a door handle. He pulled, the chassis groaned and barked and seemed to spit him out. Crashes sounded below, then an explosion lit up the night. Thank you very much for coming out.
Oh, no. Right, right?
The jockey was
Zane Miracle.
Saint Miracle.
And the mirror.
Later went on to help teach actors how to ride horses. He taught John Wayne,
Oh, yeah.
at least in my world.
I remember. All right, we have time for some
Yeah,
questions.
So how did you come across this Nazi whatever you want, this group of Nazis, this nest of Nazis in Los Angeles?
You know, I was looking for, you know, there's always murders in Los Angeles. There's always a starlet getting murdered back in the 30s, it seems like. And I really couldn't find anything, and I stumbled upon this whole, I mean, it was a huge population of LA Nazis. I mean, this park, and it's like, maybe it's not as big as Central Park in New York, but it's a massive park. And these Nazis owned it, basically. They had the run of the place. Every April 12th, I think it was, they celebrated Hitler's birthday with big parades and whatnot. And there was also this bunch of mostly Jewish folks who were working underground, infiltrating the Nazi bunds and going to Nazi meetings and all these movie premieres and whatnot, and invited German filmmakers in. And so all these underground people had infiltrated, and he got hooked up with them eventually. But I was just starting to sort it all out, and I was listening to a Rachel Maddow podcast, and she spelled the whole thing out. It's like, yeah, that's what I remember reading.
The cars and Nazis is an interesting connection because I think, was it Henry Ford? Was it people we just
Well, yeah, Ford was involved with the Nazi.
right, so
Oh, Henry Ford?
Yeah.
Yeah.
so it's
Oh,
an
yeah.
interesting kind of
Him and Lindbergh.
yeah.
What year was that Hindenburg Park and the Nazis? I didn't catch that.
In the 30s into the 40s.
Is it really called Hindenburg Park?
Yeah. Had a big bust of Hindenburg right next to the swastika, just down the road
It's just
from
so
the
crazy.
Hitler Youth camp.
It went over like a zeppelin.
So when you're doing like the research and the history and all that, and you're looking up stuff like Hitler in this part, aren't you scared of what kind of ads you're gonna start getting now? Because
Oh,
I worry about what I look up.
yeah.
I remember one time,
It's a good book.
for another book, I was gonna have, I needed a car bomb. So I Googled how you make a car bomb. And this big warning came up. And it started with, "Are you at least 13 years old?"
13, go for it.
No 12-year-olds making car bombs.
Like that.
Get parental?
Oh my.
Now they all wear red hats. What's that?
And gold tennis shoes
Yep.
now.
Why did you start this book off in the Iron Range?
The Teddy and Bera book, I was looking to write about underage, employing underage kids.
Car bomb?
And, cause I mean, like in the 19-teens, that was a huge deal. I mean, there were, 5-year-olds
again.
working, yeah. And, I thought about, at least over like in Wales and the coal miners out there, I mean, little kids working those mines and stuff. So I just looked up mine disasters. And the first thing that came up was this 1934 mine collapse. And I said, wow. And I started thinking about what I could do with someone escaping that, because most everybody in this little community died, most every male. And a lot of them were, the youngest was 14. And so I wrote a whole book about Teddy escaped that and goes on to fame and fortune and a lot of trouble.
You just had the anniversary of that.
Yeah.
This last week.
Yeah, it would have been in February, that's right. Yeah.
Was it really in Crosby, or is
Yep.
it? Oh, it was.
That was the biggest town.
Okay.
But anyway, it ends up with them give away. But anyway, the ending of Teddy and Bera is the beginning of this book. So I thought, who should I have stumble into that body laying in the road? And then I remembered this 14-year-old that had called Teddy baby fat and told him to put all his blubber behind the pushing the cart. And I said, what if I had that guy? And then it just kind of went from there.
I love how you leave all the characters throughout your books. It's amazing. It's cool.
Yeah, I do too.
Hey, you're writing, I've only read one book, The Miracles, which really captured my attention. But the way you write, you want to keep reading. And you don't, your descriptions of people and things are like you're right there.
That's really good.
And it's
Yeah.
simple, it's not convoluted writing.
Simple. I come by that easy.
Not too, it's basic, I don't know, it's not simple, it's still like a feeling, you wanna keep listening and reading.
Yeah.
Well, I'm certainly glad to hear that.
Which book is this famous fella in Along with the Foley Boys? I forget that one. Which one's
The
that one?
American
Oh, yeah.
Scrapbook.
The Foley Boys are really good.
The Foley Boys and Johnny Ray.
The one
Good.
with the Johnny Ray character.
Johnny Ray.
Yeah.
Sure is.
That was an easy one. All I had to
Yeah.
do was call around and ask people. Tell me stories about people.
There's a lot of stories.
It's a good book.
They're all so good. My favorite is Teddy and Bear. I can't help it.
Is what?
Teddy and Bear, that's my favorite. Remember I got so mad at you when you, I shouldn't say it. Two of them.
I keep wanting to put the miracles on the Facebook page of St. Paul History because that is where our Italian dads and all those places, we just all knew.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, I have to do that because when Mike was reading it, Mike went,
I tried to.
it's,
I thought I could really make it in St. Paul with that book.
Right.
well, we've got the connection. This whole family reunion.
I had it in a bookstore right in downtown St. Paul. I had a reading all set up. I had a big shot in town to name drop to somebody in the Pioneer Press who does the book reviews. And everything just flopped all of a sudden.
When
And
COVID
Canceled?
came.
Did it not happen?
all of a sudden,
When was that?
what?
When was that?
Was it during COVID?
No,
Oh, okay.
That's what I was.
it came out April of 2019. Just before COVID.
Well, downtown St. Paul's the first problem,
Yeah.
It's sad.
but there are other options.
I'm all ears when it comes to any other options, that's for sure.
How about the Minnesota History Center?
You know, way back, I think it was when I was on my third book, I wrote to them telling them what I had. And she wrote me back, which doesn't often happen. Ignoring writers is a very common thing. But she wrote me back and said, you know, doesn't really sound like anything we can use right now, but if you ever start selling more books than you can handle. So if I make it something famous,
Right, then let us.
someday I hope to hold it to that.
I have another question. I haven't read any of your books. I was, reading a newsletter or whatever, and they mentioned this, and it started off, they give a little brief beginning where it says on the Iron Range, which is where I'm from. And so, I thought, oh, this sounds like it's interesting, but, so therefore I haven't read any of these books. But it sounds like I have to read one book first before I get to this one, right?
I've skipped around through the series, and it all makes sense eventually, so you don't need to go in order, it's not
And
like
I
an
say go in
anthology.
order.
I've made it my job to make every book standalone.
Yeah.
So I,
You
and
don't have to.
like,
Well, the nice thing is you can start from the first book and you can fly through it.
Yeah.
It's not like reading a 300-page novel.
And you wanna read the next one, then you wanna
Yeah.
100
read it.
pages.
That's a good book too, The
Yeah.
Miracles.
You can totally read them separately, totally, but I just like my little order, it's quite.
What I really enjoy so much about Will's books is I'm reading and a character pops up and I go, oh, I remember this guy. And it's like meeting up with old friends, or someone
That's a good point.
you knew before. It's one of the real pleasures of reading your books. You can develop favorite characters over
Yeah.
time.
And the emotional investment, I was talking about the Teddy Bear, and I literally started crying when something happens to characters that I really love. And a character in particular. And I'm like right into, why did you?
Why you did it?
Yeah. So you.
Just to annoy you.
That's so generous.
It worked, right. I got misty eyed.
Who are some of the novelists that have meant the most to you and maybe influenced the way you write?
Oh, I'd say Kurt Vonnegut certainly, Tim O'Brien. I got my first short story published by John Gardner.
Wow.
He selected my story and then died. Him and his motorcycle went off a cliff 10 days later.
Connected.
He might, who knows, he might have been reading it.
Right? Put it down.
Got teary eyed.
What's next?
you know, I finished this book and I had one book that I've been trying to write. It would be like kind of Donald Trump COVID timing, and that proved to be very hard. And then I got this great idea for a painting that, from this book that would get stolen and sold and all over the country and was lost for good. And another one that would be right on the heels of the Packard Salesman. And I kept starting one and starting another, and now suddenly all three of them are mixed together.
So what's your process? As someone who's attempted to write and failed many times, do you give yourself X amount of time a day, or a week, or how do you approach it?
You know, when I was working nights, I just said I'm gonna write 400 words a day and 500 total on the weekends, which comes out to 10,000 words in a month. 8 months down the road, you gotta know. Another 4 or 5 months to edit it and clean it up and whatnot. And I've been doing that for the longest time.
So
Now,
you
sometimes I do 700-800 words, sometimes I only get to 300. I don't beat myself up over it. But sitting down and doing it every single day.
Does the narrative just flow out as you're writing it, or do you
Yeah.
segment it out and kind of have it blocked out?
No,
Okay.
rarely, with the historical events, I use a timeline as opposed to an outline.
Okay.
And I just try to keep track of who's where and when. But yeah, the scene just goes. I don't do a lot of rewriting other than cleaning things up.
How many times when you go to bed, does your mind keep going and you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and say, and make a note?
Rarely. I mean, if I'm woken up, I go right to my computer and type up whatever it was. But I'll sit and think about something, and maybe scratch it down on a piece of paper just so I don't forget it, but.
Are you a vivid dreamer? Do you wake up and these stories come to you?
Yeah, but never anything worth writing about.
What's your time of day you like to write? Does it have to be a time of day or a location?
From like 10 to 2 or 3,
That's a good window.
ideal.
Java has kicked in.
Never touch the stuff.
No.
With my tremors,
Oh, true.
coffee would
Okay.
kill me.
Right. Oh, my. So when you're done with the book, about how long from say you're all done, you're ready to wrap it, okay, I'm ready, I'm edited, until like a day like today? About how long is that?
Couple of months usually. I've been trying real hard to not finish my book in the fall and not have readings in the winter
Yeah.
when it gets snowed out. But it just doesn't work. I always end up
That's a crazy snowstorm.
ahead of schedule and, once I get done with one, it's like, I start thinking about another one.
Well, thanks for having your meeting on a free major night.
This is real too.
Right. This
Came in
winter has
really
been a
handy.
breeze for
Yes,
that
it
stuff.
is, yes. But there's so much, construction also.
Right.
Yeah, but, yeah, I thought it was gonna be more.
Everybody satisfied? I can't tell you how wonderful it is to see a crowd like this. I mean, the last one, there was some snow issues, you know, but standing here with 4 people in front of you is no fun at all. But this is wonderful.
You should hand out a pen and a pad and say, feel free to
Yeah,
do
I
this.
thought
And you can read and maybe you don't have to look up at everybody staring at you.
Yay?
Right. Or all 4.
All 4.
That's a great idea, though, dividing everyone's, everyone's signing in.
You remember the last one?
It wasn't as good as
We were gonna come.
It was a
The
horrible
weather got so
snowstorm.
bad, yeah.
You were, me too.
But, okay, cool.
All right, if everybody wants to start a line at the front.